Hi, this is day 4 of our quadrilaterals unit. In these notes, it says it's for a quiz. We were just reviewing, and we're going to move on to the next lesson later. But it's a brief lesson. This is another way I can ask you the same kind of questions about parallelogram properties. And what it is these are all the parallelograms, and their special types like rectangle, rhombus, and square. So what I want you to notice is what is true. So looking at these properties on the left here, these are all the different properties I've told you. There should be about 10 of them there. So for example, opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, diagonals form two congruent triangles. So that's an interesting one. Diagonals bisect each other, diagonals are congruent, diagonals are perpendicular bisector, diagonals bisect opposite angles, adjacent sides are congruent, consecutive angles are congruent, opposite angles are supplementary, diagonals form right angles for right triangles, and consecutive angles are supplementary. That's a lot. Some of these are rules, some of these are just situations. So let's start with the first one. Opposite sides are parallel. Well, opposite sides are parallel is a parallelogram rule. So automatically, it works for all of them. So it is all of these. So it is a parallelogram rule. Whereas if I say the opposite sides are equal, that is also a parallelogram rule. So again, it works for all of them. So these are all true. If the opposite angles are equal, that also is a parallelogram rule. So again, that works for all 4 of these. Then we got this weird one. Diagonal forms two congruent triangles. So if I draw a picture and I draw a diagonal, that's a rectangle. Those look congruent. Can I do that with a rhombus? Yeah. Can I do it with a square? Yeah. So I guess the big question is, can you do it with a parallelogram? So I'm going to try and elongate it here. So if I make this, we know the opposite sides are equal. Oh, look, it's side, side, side. So those are congruent triangles. So that is a yes for parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus, and square. Notice what I did there. It wasn't a rule that I've given you in the past. It was a situation, and I had to just draw pictures and sort of feel it out. Diagonals bisect each other. That is a parallelogram rule. Diagonals are equal. Ooh, that is a rectangle rule. It's not a parallelogram rule. What else would it be also true for then if it's a rectangle rule? That's right, a square. Diagonals are perpendicular bisectors. That's actually a rhombus rule. Remember, rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular, and the bisector part is just part of the parallelogram thing. So, but the perpendicular part's the key. And again, if it's a rhombus, it's also a square. Diagonals bisect the opposite angles. That is a rhombus rule, which means it's also a square. Adjacent sides are equal. Adjacent sides are equal. Well, the only way that works is if the same sides next to each other are equal. This is not a parallelogram rule. It is not a rectangle rule. It is a rhombus and a square that have that situation. For consecutive angles are equal, so that is where the consecutive angles are equal like this. That looks like that's a rectangle rule. So that is a rectangle and square. Opposite angles are supplementary. Well, that means they have to add up to 180. So I don't know I know these are equal to each other, but I don't know if they add up to 180. That's not going to help me for parallelograms. Same thing for rhombus. But what is 90 plus 90? Yeah, it's 180. So that's a rectangle and a square that have that situation. Diagonals form right triangles. Well, that's only going to be possible if there's a right angle. So we know it's got to be a rectangle, and then also squares have right angles. And then consecutive angles are supplementary. That actually is a parallelogram rule. And that is how we fill it out. So notice, some things it's their rule, but they also affect other shapes. Some things are not parallelograms or rectangles. Some things are not rhombuses. But look at square. Everything in this list ended up being a square rule because squares, like we said earlier, are perfect. They do everything. They're the miracle workers of the world. So they are the Teddy Roosevelt of the quadrilaterals. If you don't know anything about Teddy Roosevelt, you should look up some information about him. He was amazing. So that's it for today. The rest of it's going to be just a quick review of these kind of facts. We're going to do this review for a couple days, and then we will move on and talk about trapezoids and kites to finish off the chapter.